Oh, I hear myself. My check. For Jeff, my check.
Testing, 1, 2. The subcommittee will come to order. After recognizing myself and Ranking Member Deutsch for 5 minutes each, we will then recognize members for their opening statements for 1 minute. We will then hear from our witness. Thank you, without objection. Your prepared statements will be made a part of the record, and members may have 5 days to insert statements and questions for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. The chair now recognizes herself for 5 minutes. The Antiterrorism Assistance Program, ATA, is one of the State Department's key tools in advancing some of our national security interests. Its primary mission is to enhance the capabilities of foreign partner nations with the goal of allowing them to better detect, deter, and prevent acts of terrorism. The program also gives our partners the tools, the skills, and training required to respond to acts of terror and to apprehend and prosecute the individuals responsible for these atrocious acts. According to the State Department, since the program was first implemented in 1983, 84,000 personnel from 154 countries have been provided training, and the United States has provided bilateral ATA assistance to 34 partner nations. And while the majority of the ATA training occurs in host countries or at regional facilities, we do perform a considerable amount of activities here in the U.S. This domestic training includes tactical training, which state has subcontracted out to just 2 facilities, one in Virginia and the other in North Carolina. And while it has concerns that there may be lax security and oversight in at least one of these facilities, and that is what has led to the report that GAO is here to testify on today, so we welcome you. In late 2015, a South Florida reporter approached Ranking Member Deutsch and me with some very concerning allegations regarding the security measures in the Virginia facility. There were also allegations from the local residents near the facility that some of the trainees were taking unauthorized departures from training. The reporter filmed herself driving into the facility, no questions asked. And worst, she walked up to an explosive storage area undeterred and undetected. And while Mr. Deutsch and I viewed this, we asked GAO to conduct a review of the security measures at the domestic facilities and to document how the State Department selects, screens, and vets potential students, particularly those who come to the United States. And what we found as a result of this review is a mixed bag. Vetting procedures are in place and appear to have been followed and implemented. The domestic facilities had done proper documentation and likely as a result of the reporting took voluntary measures to make their facilities more secure. But then we run into many of the same issues we have repeatedly heard from these GAO reports when it comes to program management at state. Most concerning is that we have incomplete or even worse, inaccurate participant data. This is troubling for several reasons. First, we don't have a complete or accurate data on the participants. We won't be able to follow up then on measures or measure the success of the program. And second, if we have incomplete or inaccurate data, how can we be sure that these individuals were indeed fully and properly vetted? That issue becomes compounded when looking at another GAO finding, and that is that there have been unauthorized departures from the ATA program. Perhaps more troubling, while GAO was making inquiries at ATA officials, ATA identified a further 20 former participants from that DHS had no indication who had departed from the United States. Wow. So who are these people? Where did they go? Why is there such a gap in communication between the ATA and DHS? There was no formal process of actually following up and ensuring that these participants actually got on a plane and returned home. This might be a small number of participants, but given what we know, I suspect that if a deeper dive was done, we might find more unauthorized departures. It is frustrating for us. We know that there are important programs that are vital tools that our State Department can use to further our interests. But when we see time and again, serious deficiency when it comes to program management and oversight, you have to start asking the hard questions. State Department has obligated nearly $750 million for the ATA program for fiscal years 2012 to 2016, but ATA has had difficulties even getting that money out the door. GAO reported that there was about $172 million in unobligated balances for the ATA program for those years, and worse, $36 million has expired. In some cases, when we do get that money out, we have no way of following up, as a recent audit by the State Inspector General's office reported. That audit finds that there was an absence of performance reporting in Pakistan that prevented ATA from measuring the effectiveness of that program because our people were not given the visas or the access to travel around the country as would be required for proper oversight. I would imagine that there will be more of that across the ATA program. So how do we begin to address the shortcomings so that we can ensure that this key program is as effective as it can be? And that is what we're here to discuss with GAO, and we look forward to hearing more from our witness. And with that, I'm so pleased to turn to my good friend, the Ranking Member, Mr. Deutsch of Florida.
Thank you, thank you, Madam Chairman, for convening today's hearing and for joining together to request that this GAO report be published to review the State Department's Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program, or ATA as it's known. I also want to thank our witness, Mr. Baer, for joining us today and for the work that you do every day to ensure proper government oversight. At a time when we are all concerned about the rise and spread of terrorism, I think we should be thankful for the important work of ATA. Since the program began in 1983, the State Department has worked to educate and train local law enforcement and security entities in over 150 countries across the globe. Building the capacity of partner nations to indigenously prevent terrorist attacks and then respond to and investigate attacks when they happen means fewer American forces need to be sent overseas. ATA has spent hundreds of millions of dollars training nearly 90,000 security forces in countries from Morocco to India. So the goal here today is to better understand that investment and determine how we can improve the program. The GAO report being discussed was initially requested because of some excellent reporting by a local Miami journalist who brought to the chair's attention and to my attention concerns with the security and implementation of the ATA program at a local training facility just a couple of hours from where we sit today. Thanks to her reporting, that facility in Virginia, which she found to have left gates unlocked and open, allowing her to walk up to unguarded explosive lockers, has since increased its security. She also raised concerns about international participants in the training program leaving the courses to stay in the U.S., and whether we're spending taxpayer dollars to train security forces to fight terrorism as we spend those taxpayer dollars. I think it's fair to expect that they then use that training to go home to fight terrorism. This one example, though, raised much bigger questions about how the State Department is using the roughly $150 million annually allocated toward the ATA program. So we're here today not to criticize the important work of the State Department or the critical counterterrorism efforts of the ATA program, but rather to fulfill our legal and constitutional duty of program oversight to ensure that American taxpayers' investments are being used effectively and efficiently. The GAO is our trusted nonpartisan government watchdog who just completed a report analyzing this program. Unfortunately, but I would say predictably, the report finds some of the exact same problems that past reports have highlighted. The State Department struggles with management of these programs, including data collection and an alarming inability to even track participants in the program. This has made it difficult to then monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of the program. And if you can't evaluate how effective a program is, you can't determine how to fix it. A report from the State Department's Office of the Inspector General in May of this year found that the ATA program in Pakistan failed to implement the recommendations from the last 2012 GAO report, namely that there is still no effective monitoring and evaluation process. That's a problem. At the same time, I think it's important to highlight some of the good that was found in this report. ATA prides itself on training programs that emphasize the rule of law and respect for human rights, and this report showed that not to be an empty slogan. The report states that all participants studied in the program had gone through proper vetting, which prohibits the U.S. from providing assistance to any security forces implicated in any form of human rights abuses. Additionally, the State Department performs criminal and terrorism-related screening for all potential participants in the ATA programs, allaying some concerns of potential security risks. There is a lot embedded in this report, so I think we're all looking forward to you, Mr. Baer, helping unpack it for us. We hope that you'll help us better understand the significance of what you found and offer specific recommendations for improving this important anti-terrorism assistance program. We look forward to your testimony, and I thank the chair.
Thank you so much to the ranking member, and seeing no other requests for opening statements, I'm delighted to introduce our witness, Mr. Jason Baer, who serves as the acting director of the GAO's International Affairs and Trade team. Prior to this slot, Mr. Baer was assistant director in the same office, and while Mr. Baer's work is familiar to the subcommittee, I'm pleased that we now have the opportunity to have him testify on his team's work for the first time. I tried to convince him that we have a hazing procedure, but he didn't fall for it. But thank you, Mr. Baer, for being with us. I know that you've led multiple teams in evaluating and improving the effectiveness of U.S. efforts to fight terrorism abroad. Your recent work has taken you to Pakistan, Yemen, the United Arab Emirates, Kenya, and elsewhere. Thank you for being here. We look forward to hearing your testimony. Congratulations on your recent promotion. And before we start, I'm so pleased to see Mr. Charles Johnson in the audience today with his GAO team. Charles is very well known to this subcommittee, and we thank him for all of his work over the years. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for being here. And with that, Mr. Baer, we will proceed on to your testimony. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Chairman Ros-Lehtinen, Ranking Member Deutsch, and other members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to be here this morning to discuss GAO's work regarding the State Department's Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program. My official statement for the record summarizes the report that you've referred to, which we're releasing today, which covers three main topics. Number one, the security of domestic training facilities. Number two, human rights vetting and terrorist screening. And three, oversight of ATA participants. The main message of our work is that states should improve both its data and oversight of ATA participants. However, before I focus on those areas for improvement, I'd like to quickly summarize our findings related to facility security and vetting. First, with regard to the security of ATA's domestic training facilities, we found that following media reports in 2015, there were allegations of potential vulnerabilities, and State Department officials and contractors have taken various steps to ensure security, including some after the initiation of our review. For instance, consistent with ATF regulations, both training facilities maintain locked explosive containers and have locked and alarmed armories for storing weapons and ammunition. Second, with regard to vetting, we found that state completed required human rights vetting for ATA participants and screens all ATA participants for links to terrorism. However, with regard to the third topic of oversight of ATA participants, we found weaknesses in two important areas. First, ATA has not maintained adequate records of its courses and participants. As a result, ATA data are incomplete and unfortunately sometimes inaccurate. For instance, despite reporting having trained about 56,000 participants since 2012, ATA was only able to provide records for less than half, or about 25,000 participants. Such data weaknesses limit ATA's ability to manage the program effectively and accurately report on its performance to Congress and the American people. We are recommending that state improve its collection of data regarding the ATA program, and state has agreed to implement changes. The second key weakness is related to ATA's oversight of participants. Specifically, we found that while ATA does have an oversight process in place during training activities, it does not confirm that participants return home after the completion of their training. With regard to overseeing participants during training, we found that 10 participants have made unauthorized departures from training participating in the United States since 2012. As of September 2017, 2 of the 10 have subsequently departed the United States. 6 remain in the United States, having applied to DHS for asylum. One is believed to be in the United States and is the subject of an open DHS investigation, but is not known to pose a security threat. And as of October 3rd, we had not received requested information from DHS regarding the 10th individual. I do have to note that while the vast majority of ATA participants do return home after training is complete, we've also learned about 20 individuals trained in the United States since 2012 who do not appear to have departed. ATA officials and staff at the facilities that we visited described their responsibilities for overseeing ATA participant departures to include escorting the ATA participants to the airport, helping them check in for their flights, and escorting them to airport security. Importantly, because ATA lacked a process for confirming their return home, State was unaware of these 20 cases until after we began our review, some of which are more than 4 years old. State has finally notified DHS of these 20 individuals in August 2017. We have two primary concerns about State's lack of a process to confirm that ATA participants return to their home countries. First, ATA may not be able to assess the extent to which former participants are using their ATA training. And second, ATA may not be able to provide information to DHS about participants whose failure to depart may warrant enforcement action. Therefore, we are recommending that State implement a process to confirm that ATA participants return to their home countries. State has agreed to do so by the end of this year for ATA participants trained in the United States. Chairman Ros-Lehtinen, Ranking Member Deutsch, other members of the subcommittee. This concludes my prepared statement. I'd be happy to answer your questions at this time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the work that you and your team provided. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, as well, and the entire GAO program. I wanted to ask you a question regarding one of your recommendations that you talked about. You noted that the State Department concurred with your recommendation to develop a process to confirm the return home of any ATA participant trained outside their home country. And State response seems to indicate it only intends to implement such a process for those trained in the United States and not necessarily for those trained in one of the regional facilities or elsewhere outside their home country. Is that your understanding of how State plans to address this issue going forward? And if so, would you say that it is important for State to also develop a similar process for those trained overseas?
Yeah, thank you for the question and for identifying the distinction between those 2 points. As we talk about in the report, certainly from a security perspective, of course we want to make sure that anyone who comes to the United States for training does depart. However, we think it is also important that the State Department make sure that those who are trained at regional training facilities return so that they can use the training that we've paid for in order for them to be able to enhance the capabilities of the units that they return to. Based on the comments that State's officially provided in our report, which are published in the back, they've clearly said that they're going to do the first part of that, but it's not clear that they're going to do the second part. We'll continue to monitor that and follow up with the State Department as they implement.
Thank you, and do let us know your progress on that. And regarding this inaccurate or incomplete information on participant, I think that it's one of the most concerning findings for your review. Did you identify the weakness in the process design, or was it a management and oversight issue? And without complete and accurate information, do you think that it would be possible to gauge how effective the ATA program is?
Yeah, so let me take both of those questions in turn. So on the first issue of kind of what's the root cause of what was going on here, why did we only get about half of the participant records that we were looking for? The issue was not with a policy. They in fact have a clear policy that directs ATA staff to include all participants in their participant data system. And so it was really an implementation issue. So when we probed with State Department officials about what exactly was going on there, they pointed to recent staff turnover. People weren't fully educated on exactly what they were supposed to do. They didn't fully understand the policy, and that's something that they've committed to address. The second half of your question is also important in terms of how can you assess the effectiveness of the program. That's something clearly we want to continue to focus on, and the inability to say who it is that you've trained and how they've continued to use that capability would undermine their ability to give you a good comprehensive answer.
Absolutely. And one last question. This is regarding State's future plans for the ATA program. State has indicated that it wants to move most, if not all, domestic training overseas, with Jordan as the most likely destination. First, how far along is State in making this shift? As I mentioned earlier, State has said it has been planning this move for years. Hasn't happened yet. And second, you have a footnote in your report that says that ATA officials compared costs and came to the conclusion that it would be more cost-effective to do this training overseas, but that GAO did not evaluate ATA's analysis. Did ATA provide you with any details or numbers at all, and tell us more about this shift for training overseas?
Yeah, so let me first talk about what we know about the State Department's progress in implementing this shift in the program. I guess I would first start by noting about 10% over the last several fiscal years of the training has occurred domestically. And so that's what was really open for being moved to regional training facilities or to host partner nations. And so that's really what the focus has been. Even during the course of our work, when we were visiting the facilities in Virginia and North Carolina, they were talking to us about the fact that they'd already seen some of those task orders being moved overseas. I would also note that State Department has out for competition right now a request for proposals for a renewal of the Global Antiterrorism Assistance Contract, and that I think will govern exactly where the State Department goes. With regard to the second half of your question about evaluation of cost, we did obtain some limited information from the State Department about their analysis on cost savings that they might realize by moving overseas. And it was really just the comparison for one theoretical training course and the cost for things like facilities and travel, whether that was completed at either of the facilities here in the United States or in the facility in Jordan. We didn't evaluate that, so I can't tell you whether we would say that that was a justified response.
Thank you very much. You're an excellent witness, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Mr. Deutsch, I'm pleased to recognize you now for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I agree with the chair. I think you're an excellent witness, and it's a fine opportunity to express our appreciation for the important work that GAO does. So thanks to all of you. Thanks for your testimony and for being here. Can you provide us with some examples from your engagements review, the ATA program, of the most successes of the program? Where does it work the best? We're getting into the challenges, and you address some of those, but are there successes you can highlight?
Yeah, certainly. I think this is one of those areas where we want to focus on what works in a program. And I would say, in addition to GAO's analysis, and I know we've already heard about the State Office of Inspector General, who recently did a review as well. I would note that there have been evaluations, independent evaluations by the Counterterrorism Bureau that have looked at the program a little more holistically and in countries. And in some of the countries that they've looked at, including Morocco, as well as Bangladesh, they really cite the growth of the bilateral relationship on a law enforcement level in those countries, helping grow not only their counterterrorism capability, but also their willingness to participate in joint investigations and things like that, which clearly provide benefits to the United States.
And so shifting that, if GAO reviews consistently find problems at the State Department with oversight and management, why aren't we seeing greater improvements? You talked about the recent staff turnover as being one of the problems here. Do we need to do a better job hiring career program managers instead of foreign service officers at posts to manage programs like this? Would that help address some of these problems? And if we did that, what would that look like?
So I would say we don't specifically address that question of career versus foreign service officers in this report. I guess this is, again, just to be clear, a program which is overseen by the Counterterrorism Bureau, a Bureau of Counterterrorism and Countering Violent Extremism, that provides policy direction and oversight, but it's really implemented by the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, especially their regional security officers in the host countries. We all are well acquainted with the challenges that the security challenges that we face at our embassies and consulates abroad. This is an additional duty that's upon them, and as we've highlighted in a recent report looking at overall diplomatic security key issues, we've in September of this year put out a report that covers some of those key issues for oversight, which make it clear the Bureau of Diplomatic Security has a broad and deep set of responsibilities, and this is admittedly one of the responsibilities that doesn't make the press as much, but certainly is very important that they need to continue to focus on.
Right, as you highlight in your report and here today. And finally, are there other State Department security assistance programs that can serve as a model for improved monitoring and evaluation of the ATA program, specifically thinking about the difficulties in Pakistan?
So I would say I wouldn't point to any specific program that I would say is doing a great job in monitoring and evaluation. I would, though, to be fair to the State Department, give them credit. They have a clear and explicit policy for monitoring and an evaluation. And as I talked about in my statement and in response to earlier questions, they are doing some evaluations. They're doing some of those deeper dives. I think some of the issues that the state OIG and we have identified over time really fall into that monitoring bucket. And that for us is more focused on managing the day-to-day operation of the program, as opposed to taking that step back every few years and saying, how well are we doing at achieving our goals? And so I think that monitoring piece is where we want to focus on, and we want to see them continue to put their time and effort.
Terrific. This is very, very helpful, and we appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Bear. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deutsch. So pleased to recognize Mr. Mast, another great Floridian in our subcommittee, for his
Thank you,
questions.
Chairman. Thank you very much. Hey, I appreciate your time. I just have one specific line of questioning, and it falls in line with this as we layered on the conversation. You know, you can always talk about what is possible out there in the world, and that could be an important conversation. I try to spend more time on what is probable, because I think that does often get us a little bit closer to what the real threats are. So from you, I just want to simply know, gauge your assessment of an insider threat and our capability of combating insider threats. What is your take on the true probability of nefarious inside activities and our ability to go out there and combat those activities? What is your assessment of that?
So with regard to the anti-terrorism assistance program that we focus on in this report, I'd highlight the work that we did confirming the State Department's vetting, not only for gross violations of human rights, as well as for terrorist screening. I can't get into all the details of all the systems that they might check for terrorist screening, but I will say...
Then they would know what we do.
Correct.
Exactly. Please continue.
Yeah. So what we did is we confirmed that, in fact, the State Department ATA program was doing all the vetting that was required of them. Under the State Department Leahy law, we were able to look at a generalizable random sample and confirm that every one of the individuals for whom we were able to get data was vetted as required. In terms of the terrorist screening, we also confirmed that in the first instance, every ATA participant is subject to terrorist screening. And then second, for those individuals who are brought to the United States for training, obviously they need to get visas to come to the United States, and there's that additional layer of security. And so I'd say we did find a number of screens in place to ensure that State Department is doing everything that they can. Having said that, there's no system which is going to be perfect. And they do, though I think, have a reasonable assurance that they're taking the steps that they need to.
Exactly right. No system is going to be perfect. When you're combating threats like this, you're combating the imagination of somebody else. It is a game of cat and mouse. It's never easy to do. And so that's where I'm really just looking for your opinion on it. If you were given carte blanche, is it where you would want it to be at, or would you see drastic changes?
So it's not, unfortunately, it's not something we specifically address in the report. But I would say, again, the State Department was able to satisfy us that they were taking the steps that they need to, and there is not a tremendous concern about insider threats with this program. Because one of the things that they pointed out to us is that the people trained in the program are foreign law enforcement officials whose charge is to combat terrorism in their home country. And while, again, that doesn't provide perfect assurance, these are people that we're partnering with on a day-to-day basis to try to combat terrorism in those countries.
Certainly, and I've worked with law enforcement in Afghanistan, and not always a group that, you know, in some cases it was successful work, and in many cases it was not a group that I wanted to necessarily turn my back on. Yeah. And, you know, and that's the reality of the situation. It's very difficult for you to deal with as well, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mast, very much. Now we turn to Mr. Schneider. Thank you.
Thank you, and again, thank you for having this hearing. Mr. Bear, thank you so much for being here and sharing your report. A number of questions, I think you've touched on these, but I'm going to ask them again. Would you say you're satisfied that the security issues identified leading up to the report have been addressed by the Department of State and the ATA program?
Yes, I'd say what we've done is we looked at the foundation for what are the security requirements. Again, as we were having the conversation about before, that is fundamentally what's in the contract that the State Department has signed with the facilities. Admittedly, those requirements are relatively general, but they do include things like having the appropriate licenses in place, whether they be from the ATF or from state or local officials. And that covers everything from controlling explosives, guarding ammunition, things like that. As well, we observed not only during our site and surveillance visits that they have made some additional changes in terms of improving perimeter security, building additional fences, gates, things like that. We saw evidence that all those things had taken place.
Great. Now, security is not static. It's a dynamic, constant changing challenge. Are you comfortable, to what extent and what reasons would you say you're comfortable that ATA and our contractors are committed to constantly reviewing and making the necessary changes to ensure security is up to the level we expect?
Yeah, so I would say in our conversations with both the State Department officials overseeing the program on a day-to-day basis, as well as the contractors that we visited in both Virginia and North Carolina, they were certainly committed to that. Having said that, as you acknowledge, we looked at this in a point in time, and there's going to be need for continued vigilance to make sure that any new security threats would be addressed. Having said that, though, certainly the media reports did focus everyone's attention, not only at the State Department, but on the part of the facilities, on the need to make sure that strong security measures were in place.
Great. Shifting gears a little bit here, whose responsibility is it to oversee the effectiveness, but also the return on investment of the ATA program, that we're actually getting a return on the monies we're investing in these programs?
So again, as I talked about before, the program has a unique structure in that the Bureau of Counterterrorism and Counterviolent Extremism is responsible for policy and oversight, and they do some of that oversight evaluation piece that we were talking about before, and the Bureau of Diplomatic Security really does the implementation. So I'd say this is really a Bureau of Counterterrorism and Counterviolent Extremism that has that oversight piece.
So, but there's, what I'm hearing is a kind of a split between responsibility and authority for the program. And in that dynamic, who ultimately ends up being accountable for its effectiveness in making sure we get the return on the monies we're spending?
So I would still say that it's the Bureau of Counterterrorism and Countering Violent Extremism, and I will say over the course of our job, and we did a similar report back in 2008 where we identified some challenges to the coordination between those two bureaus and made recommendations, which the bureaus have implemented to kind of solidify and clarify their relationship and what the responsibilities were for the Bureau. So that is an area where we've seen improvement, but we think certainly continued oversight will help that.
Okay, and the last question as we run out of time. Looking forward, you mentioned a report in 2008. We have a report now in 2017. Is the frequency of review sufficient to address the challenges, or is this something that we should be working to review on a more frequent basis?
So I'll say we at GAO are always happy to do work for the subcommittee if you have a continuing interest. I would add back to my remarks before, there have been other evaluations. Both State Department OIG completed a report earlier this summer that they looked at specifically the program in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and I think they may have other work ongoing, as well as the independent evaluations that have been contracted for by the Bureau of Counterterrorism. There is an ongoing level of oversight. But having said that, certainly this committee's interest in the issue does focus the department's perspective and attention to making sure that the program is running as effectively and efficiently as possible.
Great. Thank you again. I appreciate you sharing your perspective and your candor. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. And now we're so pleased to hear from Mr. Connolly of Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I'm not sure you know that I spent 10 years on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Yes. All right. Welcome, Mr. Baer. No, let me see. The original report of GAO had, I think, 22 recommendations.
So if you're referring to the draft report that we submitted to the agencies for review, it had 3 recommendations in it, and our final one has 2.
No, that's not what I'm referring
Okay,
to.
I'm sorry.
Because Mr. Engel and I wrote a letter in November asking State Department to implement all of your recommendations, and that was, at the time, 22. 7 recs were resolved, 15 remained unresolved, and then you added 2 in the latest report, meaning there are 17 unresolved recommendations or partially resolved.
I think you may be referring to broadly our recommendations overall to the
Right.
State Department. What we've started is a process
Well, Is it overall State Department or is it Diplomatic Security Bureau?
So we have overall State Department. However, the vast majority of the recommendations that we've identified as priorities for the State Department to implement do relate to the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. And I apologize, my
No, that's
initial
all right.
answer was about our report
Right,
here.
right. We're looking at the whole thing and trying to actually get them to comply. Is it your sense that you're getting cooperation?
I would say that the State Department has certainly become more focused on implementing the recommendations. Historically, I think their implementation rate of GAO recommendations is slightly under about 80%. We would love for that to be 100%, but I think they are increasingly focusing on making sure that they're providing us timely information in response to our information requests so that we can confirm that they have in fact taken the steps that we've
So
recommended.
we had a hearing last week on the State Department reorganization. How is that reorganization affecting your recommendations and the work you've done in this sphere?
So I don't know that I have a broad answer for you with regard to the work that we're doing
Narrow's
on a day-to-day
fine.
basis. So what we have, what I can speak to specifically on this report regarding the Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program is we're not aware of any organizational changes either in the pipeline or being considered with regard to this specific program. It certainly is something that we want to continue to focus on to provide you all the information that you need as you continue to do oversight.
Well, may I be so bold as to recommend that GAO might want to pay attention to it, because we're not talking about trivial cuts. If they go forward with the Trump recommendation, you're talking about a 32% cut to State Department and AID. That undoubtedly would affect this Bureau and the personnel necessary to carry out your recommendations and to make sure there's decent evaluation and oversight. So I really think it's very relevant to the subject at hand, and I strongly urge you to look at it. What is your I was a little puzzled by the discussion about people not being properly monitored as they completed the program and were supposed to leave the country. Is there evidence that people who were in the program have stayed illegally in the United States?
Yeah, so let me clarify a little
Yeah.
bit. So really what we're talking about probably is the group of 20 individuals that we identified. All those individuals did in fact complete their ATA training domestically between 2012 and 2016. State Department's policy is to escort them to the airport and to
No, I
airport
got all
security.
that. What's your concern?
Our concern is twofold. First and foremost, if those people haven't left the country, there is a concern about what they're doing here.
No, Mr. Bear, unfortunately I have 1 minute and 14 seconds left. That's why I'm interrupting you. Forgive me. Is there evidence that any of those 20 stayed here illegally?
19 of the 20 individuals, according to DHS records, are likely still in the United States.
Ah, okay. And so we have reason to be concerned.
They have not fulfilled the responsibilities as when they came in and were admitted to the United States.
Got it. And final question. There's been, OIG did a report on ATA in Pakistan.
Right.
What are the concerns with the program in Pakistan?
So again, that's a very country-specific focus.
I know, but it's
as
kind
talk
of an
about
important
monitoring of the program and some of the contract elements of that as it related to Pakistan were really the key focus there. There was also some equipment that hadn't been used that had been sitting there for a long time because training wasn't occurring, and that's something that the IG pointed out that was potentially an opportunity for efficiency. That equipment could be taken to other places.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. And Mr. Meadows of North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Bear, so let me follow up where Mr. Connolly left off, because funding always becomes an issue, and actually it's a discussion we had last night as it related to making sure that there's proper funding. And yet, I guess the GAO continues to find that there's either expired or unobligated funds in this particular program. I guess my question to you is why? I've never found a federal agency that can't spend the money, other than perhaps now we've found one. So why is that?
Yeah. So I would first and foremost say that State Department should have an excellent answer for that question. I can relay to you the answer that we got from them as we probed.
So
up
I
this
take it
particular
from your comment that it wasn't an excellent answer.
I'll let you be the judge of whether it's an excellent answer or not. I can tell you what they told us. First and
It
foremost,
might be a Garrison Keillor. Pretty good answer.
so first and foremost, the vast majority of the funds that were unobligated were fiscal year 2016 funds. The way the appropriations are
Yeah,
for this program,
but
they get
prior
2 years.
years, they expired.
Correct. So the expiration of funds is something that we don't want to occur. We want to focus on getting them to spend those funds within the time periods that they're allotted.
So why are they not?
So the explanation largely hinged on changes in the program as it evolved over time. So let's say a training event is scheduled in Pakistan. If it's near the end of the fiscal year and let's say the trainers can't get a visa to travel, it would have to be bumped to the next fiscal year. And if it didn't occur in the fiscal year that it needed to, those funds wouldn't have been used in time.
All right, well, so I could buy that with 2016 unobligated funds, but as I mentioned, 2015 funds expired. Is this not a historical problem with this program?
This is something that we certainly have had concerns about over time and have provided.
So their
guidelines
answer
for.
does not bear out in terms of what we know historically has happened on this program. So should we do away with the program, Mr. Baer?
So we don't make a judgment about whether the program should continue or not.
I do, but go ahead. What is your opinion? I'm asking you your opinion.
So it's complicated, as the chair talked about before. There are aspects of the program that are working very effectively, and there are many tens of thousands of officials that have been trained, but we think the program, if it continues, needs to be operated more effectively from a program management.
So where does the buck stop? Where at state does it stop? Who are the people that we ought to have there in the hot seat instead of you to get better answers where Madam Chairman can drill down and make sure that we're effective and efficient with taxpayer dollars?
Yeah, so the Bureau of Counterterrorism and Countering Violent Extremism provides policy oversight and guidance, and the Bureau of Diplomatic Security actually implements the program on
So
the ground.
both of them is what you're saying?
Both of them are involved.
Who are in those positions right now?
I'm not familiar with exactly who's in those positions. As we've talked about, there's a lot of changes going on at the State Department.
So if you don't know who would know?
The State Department should be able to give you an answer to who's acting in the relevant.
I guess who are you talking to at state? I mean, obviously you're not talking to a fictitious person. Who's your contact at state?
Yeah, so certainly happy to come and brief you and your staff on the specific individuals that we met with. They were largely program level officials. I think the answers that you're more
All right,
interested in are at a higher level.
here's what I would ask you get back to the chairman on, is we need to know the two individuals responsible for this particular issue at state, get that back to this subcommittee and the chairman. And then if you will let them know and take back that we are very concerned with the inefficient use of taxpayer dollars on a critical mission. And if it's not clear enough, if you will get back to me personally, I'll be glad to make a personal phone call. Would you do that, Mr. Baer?
I'm happy to carry that back. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I'll yield
Will the
back.
gentleman yield for a
Sure.
second? I would ask Mr. Baer if, given the role that the diplomatic security plays here, does it make a difference? Should it make a difference that the Assistant Secretary of State for Diplomatic Security that position is currently vacant, and the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security and the Director of the Diplomatic Security Service, that's also a vacant position?
It may make a difference insofar as policy decisions and who's empowered to make those decisions.
Because perhaps my friend might join me in urging that we move forward as quickly as possible to fill those positions in this vitally critical area, which
I will
has been highlighted by this.
I'll make a bipartisan agreement here. I will make sure the administration acts quickly on those appointments if you will make sure your Senate colleagues in the upper chamber will confirm and due diligence.
I look
yield
forward
back.
I look forward to working with my friend on that. Thank you.
Thank you and who knows, there might be more vacancies at the topper levels of state today. Who knows? What's happening? Thank you so much, Mr. Baer. Thank you to the excellent team at GAO. We appreciate everything that you've done. We will follow up with the requests of Mr. Meadows, excellent requests, and Mr. Deutsch, and we will attempt to get those answers as soon as we get those folks there. Thank you. With that, our subcommittee is adjourned. Muchas gracias.
Check mic one. Check, check. Nothing. Check, check. Check one, check two. Check one. Check one. Check, check. A, B, C, D. It just sounds like the mic's not on. Check, check, check. Check, check, check. Yeah. Check. Test. Check, check. No, I'm actually fine, yeah. Yeah, I mean, check, check, check. Check. Turn the gain up a good bit and see if it maxes when I speak. Check, check, check. Yeah, should be registering that. Too much interference or nothing but interference. Have you tried swapping this out? Yeah. This extension? Yeah. You did? Oh, that could be a problem. You know, I've had it. It's looked like this the whole time I've had it. So, like, for well over a year. Where was the other? So, yeah, that was tied up. Plug that into that quarter inch. Check, check. There you go. Oh, there we go. See what it sounds like now. Check, check. This is a check. See if it sounds any better. Still getting a lot of interference? Or does it sound? Yeah. Is it loud enough that it would sound fairly clean? Or is it? It's coming through clean, but there's a lot of static. With the gain, like, it's not even a question of gain. Like, I can hear your voice. The more gain I put on it, the more static I get. Mm-hmm. See, how low can you turn the gain down and still get a good recording of my voice? Just, yeah. And so can you still hear me at this point? Can you hear this? And is the interference interfering with the sound of my voice? Or is it low enough that it's not an issue? It's not, yeah, it's there, but it's not interfering with the sound. Yeah. It might be as good as it's going to get today.
The other room, I think 2,200, never had that problem. It's always been super crisp.
Yeah, a while back, we were having some issues in this room, but we thought they had them all sorted out. What about, what are your adapters plugged straight into? Is that,
Yeah,
do you have a lift or something that you could?
No, I don't.
Plug them into this and then plug that straight into your power. That might remove some of it. Fine. All right, nice and clean. Sound good? Sounds good? All right. All right.